every laugh. Every laugh, every smile, every hug, every kiss, every touch, every person in my life that I care about and love. But wait, maybe I'm getting too emotional. That's exactly what they say you ain't supposed to do. Suppress your feelings, never talk about your pain. Can't appreciate the sun without acknowledging it rains, right? That's right. So this a moment of clarity. And make sure you always protect your energy. You stay focused and your life gon' be lit. And you are now rocking with Celeste, the therapist. Let's go.
Hi, beautiful people. So if you have never been into this live stream before, or you're watching me on the replay, hi, my name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from Boston. And I have a podcast called Celeste the Therapist Podcast. And my goal is to just help people shift the way that they think. Hey, Wes, how are you? My goal is to just help people shift the way they think. And I've been able to do that by talking to people that are doing things to empower the lives of others. And I've been podcasting since 2018. But ever since COVID started, I wanted to come on video and kind of bring the podcast live to you. And miraculously, people have agreed to come on and be a part of video. I think being on video is a lot harder than just talking on audio. So I'm beyond grateful. This has been going on for the last 5 weeks. Hey, AP, how are you? So we are streaming on Facebook. We're streaming on Periscope. And we are streaming on YouTube. So we're streaming on 3 different platforms. And so today's Friday. So Monday through Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can always catch me on here talking to somebody or talking to you guys. And the reason why I wanted to be a little bit more intense with it is to give you options that you can look forward to despite everything that's going on. Hey, John, hey Camille, how are you guys? I appreciate you guys for joining. So before I bring on my special guest, I wanted to quickly put up 2 things. One, this text crisis line, 741-741. This is a line that's free to use. You can text this line if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling overwhelmed. That's one thing that a lot of people are struggling with. There's a lot of the symptoms that have been exacerbated by COVID. A lot of things had already been happening even prior to COVID. And so like all that did was make it more intense. If you missed my podcast yesterday or my live yesterday, definitely catch it. I talked about living in the moment and the importance of living in the moment. I think that if we can work on looking at the things that we do have control over, it can really help us work on the way that we're feeling, because there's so much we don't have control over. So that's important. Hey, Irby, somebody said, what do you mean shifting the way you think? So a lot of times we get stuck in our thought process. And a lot of times the way that we're stuck is in a negative way. And so like we can't change our past, right? We can't change our current state. Sometimes the state that we're in, we literally can't change it. But what we can change is the way that we think about it. And so a lot of times we have not thought about thinking things differently because we are just stuck in the fact that things aren't going a certain way. So we just kind of stay stuck in that way. And speaking of that, I wanted to tell you guys about my free wellness assessment course or assessment that you can take. It's free. You just go to my website, celestetherapist.com. The reason why I created this is because a lot of times, like what I just talked about, us being stuck, there are different areas of our lives and we don't really take space to pinpoint the areas that we're struggling in. And so we just kind of struggle. So I want you to understand how to do things a little bit differently. And so like, it feels like everything could be chaotic, but what about if we were to like break it into little pieces to try to figure out, okay, this part needs some work. This part I'm actually doing well in. And also we can look at the areas that we're doing well in. So we're not just focusing on the parts that we're not doing so well in. So that's why I created that. You can find that at Celeste the Therapist. Hey, Rose. So I'm going to bring on my special guest, let him introduce himself to the people. This is James Perkins. Let me add him to the stream.
Hey, friends.
Hello. Hi, James. How are you? Can you introduce yourself to the people for me?
Yes.
Please?
How are we doing, friends? My name is James Perkins. I'm a a husband, of almost 10 years, can't believe it, a dad of a thriving, energetic 4.5-year-old who'll be 5 very soon, and therapist, coach, and host of the Shameless Leader podcast. And so thank you for inviting me, Celeste. I appreciate it.
Yes, I'm glad to have you. So one thing about James is that what he just said, he hosts the podcast called the Shameless Leader podcast. So I guess the fact that you named it the Shameless Leader makes me believe that you are very much passionate about talking about shame. I don't like talking about shame. When I'm feeling shameful, that's not the first thing I think about, like
Yes.
wanting to really explore. Why
Yes.
did you pick shame? Like, why are you so passionate about shame?
You know, it's interesting you said it, because that was the initial thing that I thought of when I thought about naming. I'm like, man, nobody wants to talk about shame. It's like a dirty word.
It is.
And but I've always been passionate about emotions and how they impact our life and the study of human behavior. Just an all-out passionate person about life and people's journeys.
Mm-hmm.
And what was unique in just getting into people's lives and just from academic part, just reading research and books, what kept showing up is just this emotion of shame and how it really drives our decisions on a day-to-day basis and really impacts how we essentially lead, love, parent. There is literally no thing that we can think of where shame is not at work. But oftentimes it hides beneath the surface. It's not one of the things that we often can recognize within ourselves that's going on, that no one sits around and thinks about, oh man, I think I've just hit a moment of shame. We don't think about that, but it's easy for us to identify other emotions like anger, sadness, fear, but oftentimes really the root emotion that's driving those emotions is shame. And so I wanted to create a platform where we can kind of dig deeper to talk about what that looks like, so people can hopefully, one, be able to recognize it when it's at operation in their own life, but also have some tools of how to manage it.
That's good. And when I think about it being the root of even beneath the emotions and feelings, because everybody knows I want to talk about how you're feeling. Let's talk about what you're feeling. But you're right. Shame is definitely there. And it's the reason why a lot of the feelings people have are there. When I think about now and with COVID and a lot of people are quarantined, I can only imagine that there's a lot of people where this shame is kind of sitting there. Now it can't really hide, right? Because a lot of times some of the things that we struggle with, we can't really see it because we're constantly on the go. Now we're not constantly on the go. For people that are listening to this, like, what does that look like? Because you could be speaking to somebody, but they're not really clear on what does shame look like. So what, in your experience, what would you say that looks like for people?
Yeah. I think shame, for one, it shows up in two, I often call it as a void. Excuse me. And it's almost like a tape. So shame drives 2 tapes consistently in our heads. All of us are familiar with the fact that, or if you're like me, I talk to myself every day. And if you don't realize that you're actually the person that you talk to the most every day, then that might be something to start with. If you can first just realize the person that I talk to most often every day is myself, that's going to be your starting place. And secondly, so 2 emotions or 2 tapes that it drives shame particularly is, 1, I'm not enough, and 2, I don't have what it takes. So it drives 2 tapes. 1, I am not enough, and 2, I don't have what it takes. And oftentimes it's really driving the I am not enough tape. But if you're able to overcome that one, then the second one that plays is, who do you think you are? Because that gets to the theme of trying to make you feel like you're a fraud because you may be doing something outside of your comfort zone, and shame tries to show up and say, hey, who do you think you are? You don't have any experience doing this. How many people have you seen? When have you done this? And so it tries to drive that tape, 1, to make you feel shame and eventually make you sabotage yourself, because that's really what it's after. Shame shows up in your life on a day-to-day basis, so it can sabotage what you've been called to do. And that's really inevitably why I spent a lot of time talking about this, is because I think everybody has a unique work, something that's specifically designed for them to do on the face of the earth that no one else can do. But
Mhm.
oftentimes what interrupts that is shame. It gets
Mhm.
in the way of us being able to really step into our stories in a powerful way to impact someone else. So
Mhm.
for instance, um, in this pandemic and what's going on, one of the probably common things is that people are not at work. One of the easiest ways for shame to interrupt people's life in this moment is through work, because a lot of us get our identity from our work. So if
Mhm.
we're not working, our identity, our sense of self-esteem, our sense of our self-image is kind of tarnished, because we believe in order for us to feel worthy of love and belonging and to have some sense of esteem, we have to be doing something. And
Mhm.
that's not true, because just think about it. We are human beings, not human doings. We are human beings, not human doings.
Where did this "I am enough" tape come into play? Like these two ideas of I don't have what it takes and I am enough. Like, is that something that most people tend to have, or is there something that has been interrupted in their life that has created that tape?
That's a good question. Good question. What I know for sure is that we all, from the time that we're born, we are starting to form a picture of who we are and what we think is possible by our
Mhm.
interactions with our primary caregivers, namely our mother or father, or if they were absent, probably a grandmother or a grandfather. And so these individuals, in a sense, start to shape us very early.
Mhm.
I think of it, we're all like a sense wet cement when we come out of the womb. And so we're building these interactions. We're building how we view ourselves, what we think is possible for us by these first interactions. So the three primary needs I always talk about when I speak with anyone that we all need growing up. These three needs are attention, affirmation, and affection. These three needs are attention, affirmation, and affection. So ideally, just to explain those, pretty much attention. When you get attention, when a child gets attention, rather, that child feels important. That child feels valued. When we talk about affection, we're talking about those physical displays of non-sexual touch. So loving, the hugging, kissing, things of that nature. And
Mhm.
then lastly, which I think is probably one of the most important ones, is affirmation. So affirmation are those statements that affirm your worth in the world, your contribution to the world. So parents saying things like, I believe in you. I believe you're going to do great things. So if you're getting, ideally, I'm saying
Mhm.
this with a caveat, ideally, if you're getting a good dose, essentially, of attention, affirmation, and affection, what that does is that sets you up a as a safeguard, if you will, against shame to a certain degree, because you already, from the very point that you were on this earth, and to where you are now, essentially, you've had a good, essentially, groundwork of building affirmation, attention, and affection. So you have this sense of security, this sense that I am enough, that I'm worthy of love and belonging.
Mhm.
But what often happens, I think, for all of us, is that we don't always get those needs met early
Right.
on.
Right.
And one of the interesting things I found out when I was just studying about shame is that our ability to make sense of our own story is oftentimes tied to our parents' ability in which they make sense of their own story. So I want to pause, because that's a really big thing to say. So our sense of how we develop our own sense of self-esteem and self-image is dependent on, primarily when we were growing up, our parents' own ability to understand their story and their own sense of self-esteem and self-image. So
Mm.
it's really interconnected from the very time that we're born up until some people think until they leave the house, but we know for sure that just because you leave your parents' house, or the place of your primary caregivers, that doesn't mean that your issues don't follow you.
Right.
They're all internal. And so when we are, so this is how shame starts in operation, because it doesn't wait. This is the thing about shame. It doesn't wait for us to get old to attack us.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't wait for us to get to the point where we're able to reason with it, to be able to have a conversation with you and say, you know, shame, I know you're trying to take advantage of me in this moment, but I'm not going to listen to you. It doesn't wait for that. It starts at a very early stage when we don't have that capacity to reason, because obviously when you're a toddler, your skills for critically thinking are not as advanced as they are when you're an adult.
Yeah.
And so its way of trying to interrupt you is to start very early, to get those things kind of wired into you, so that when it starts to really ramp up, or essentially not ramp up, but when it tries to really insert itself in your life as you matriculate through life, some of the defenses that you could use are already kind of broken down, because it's already inserted, if you will, the Trojan horse into your life already. Hopefully that makes sense for everybody that's listening.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I just want to put this comment up, and then I wanted to ask you another question. John is saying, but it is my shame mine, or does it belong to someone else? Is it put there by someone else? Man,
that's good.
I'll put it back up.
I do. I think it's both and. That is to say that I do believe we have that shame can be passed down from generations. Just like trauma can be passed down, just like stress can be passed down. For a long time, they weren't able to link shame or link other emotions from generation to generation. But what they've done through research, even as small as mice, they've been able to determine that stress can be passed down from one generation to the next. And I'm like, man, if it's happening in mice, you know, we have a big dilemma when it comes to humans. So the answer to that question is both. And I think it can be passed down from one generation to the next. But oftentimes, I do think our shame oftentimes gets intertwined with other people's, because if you will, we're all in a journey, in a sense, trying to come to the full and best authentic version of ourselves. So there is always going to be moments where shame will try to trigger its head or show its head in our relationships and in the places that matter to us most. So it's a both and. So
what you're saying makes a lot of sense. When I think about the fact that we can't, it's not like we break our finger and we're like, oh, look at, this is where it broke, I'm fixing it here. We can pinpoint it. When you don't have language to even express anything other than sad or pain, right? Like, I think anger and happiness are like accepted emotions. Even being sad, unfortunately, is not even an accepted emotion. But when I think about shame, a lot of people aren't like, oh yeah, this is a moment where I'm feeling shame. So it just starts to embody us, and we carry it with us, and we're taking on these different roles, and we're going through the motions, not realizing how impacted we are by the shame that we're not even able to name. So when I think about everything you just kind of said, which makes a lot of sense, how is it that somebody can get to the point of working on this shame and working on trying to change their mindset? I know for me personally, that was definitely the root of a lot of my struggles. And I did a lot of the work on my own, but I wasn't able to name it. And I think being able to name it is like really powerful. I'm curious about your mindset around people being able to change that kind of mindset in their life.
Perfect. Yeah. I think it's a combination of several things. One, I think the biggest part is, if you're going to overcome or manage your shame, or when it shows up, you're going to have to cultivate your sense of self-awareness. And one of the best ways to do that is through self-reflection. And to even get more practical, self-reflection just really involves the process of you thinking about your life and your experiences. One of the prompts that I often ask people to help them just as an initial pathway to get behind their shame is to ask them, what are you angry about? What is it that drives you? What is it that you react to quickly? If you were to think about in the last 30 days of your life, think about the moments that you have reacted quickly to, and to ask yourself, what is it about that experience that caused me to be triggered in that way? And when you're asking yourself those two questions, and then the third question I ask is, what did you have to believe in order to react that way? Because then you start to get to the root belief that is driving why you react that way. And oftentimes, once you dig enough, you'll get to the root that, man, the reason I reacted that way is that I didn't feel enough. And so when that person asked me this question, or when they said that statement in a certain way, I got angry, but really I got angry because I felt shame. I felt the sense that I wasn't enough. And so when we start to ask ourselves these questions, these self-reflective questions, it allows us, one, to start to get to the root of an experience of when it's present in our life, which then gives us the ability to recognize it again when it tries to show its head. And I think that's probably the biggest part of managing self-awareness is to find out what its triggers are in your own life. We all have our own triggers. There is nobody that is listening to your platform right now that does not have a trigger around shame. And this is a thing that when we don't talk about it, shame continues to operate. Brene Brown, who is, if you're not familiar with her, she's a social work researcher. And one of the things that she often says is that shame needs three things to survive. It needs isolation, it needs secrecy, and it needs fear of judgment. It needs isolation, secrecy, and fear of judgment. When these three things are present, shame continues to grow. So two ways that we can help to manage our shame is, one, to ask ourselves reflective questions that will get us to unearth some of these experiences that are driving our shame, so that we can start to adjust our response to them. And one of the second biggest things is being able to talk with some person that is empathetic, a person that you feel that you are comfortable with, that you can share details with. And as I always say, if you don't have that person, there are people that are really have your best benefit at heart, but sometimes we need to lead the way. And so I always tell people, hey, if you're not, I don't advise you to come out and share your whole entire life story. The first time you meet somebody and tell them, hey, I was abused when I was a child. But you can start with just revealing some small, intimate details about your life that you probably normally don't do, and see how that person responds to you. If they respond in an empathetic way, then you're on the right track. But what shame needs, the way shame is doused, or I almost picture it like a fire, shame cannot survive where empathy is present. Shame cannot survive where empathy is present. So when there is an empathetic person listening to us, and when we shared something that was very vulnerable or challenging and exposed for us, and they say to us, man, I understand, or I know how that feels. What that does is that, and it's funny, from a mental or for chemical standpoint, what it does is releases a chemical in our brain that makes us feel at ease. And sometimes it's true, but you don't always realize it when it's in motion. If you just 30 days, think about it, conversations you may have had with some friend or somebody that's close to you, and you shared something that was challenging with them, and they gave you empathy, immediately you probably felt almost, sometimes you could tell it, one of the physical cues is your shoulders drop. You feel at ease. Your breathing sometimes slows down, and you feel like, man, I'm at home.
That's really good. And one of the things I wanted to put this comment up, if you're listening to this on a podcast, she says, this is a new and interesting perspective because I think of shame as a manipulation tactic. Do you think that shame could be a manipulation tactic as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. This is why, in part, shame continues to thrive in a lot of ways, is because shame can be used as a force, as she said, as a manipulation to get something from someone or to get people to do something.
Yeah.
And so, inevitably, it's like a catch-22. Shame, we don't like when we feel it, but sometimes we can use it to our benefit. We don't like the way it feels, but we definitely can deploy it sometimes, even in our use of our own relationships, and especially long-standing relationships, or sometimes in the work environment. And to be honest with you, sometimes people don't even realize that they're shaming people. They just think it's a way to get things done.
Or
So, yeah.
if somebody's already dealing with shame, could something that somebody says tap into something that they're already feeling, like that the manipulation piece? Like if I'm
Yes.
strong, I recognize where my shame comes into play. If you're coming at me and trying to manipulate me, I don't have to allow that to come my way if I'm mindful of what you're doing and what I feel.
Yes. So this is important. I'm glad you said that, Celeste, because this gets into the fact that sometimes when our shame is triggered, we're not responding to, or I consider two words. It's one thing to respond, it's one thing to react. A reaction is something that we don't have control over. Our response is we've decided what our response, or what our action, what our words are going to be. So sometimes when our shame is triggered by someone saying something to us or someone doing something to us, oftentimes we're not reacting, or excuse me, we're not responding. We're reacting to an experience that we had just like that one in the past.
Yeah.
And so we're not even really in the moment, present in the moment, as much as it is we're responding to something happened sometimes 10, 5, 15, 20, 30 years ago. And the other person has no idea that you've just triggered them, or that they don't have any idea that they've just triggered you into this experience 30 years ago.
And you don't even realize that you're going back, but your body knows that you're going back because it keeps the score. It holds on to those emotions, where some people may say the emotion didn't warrant the response, but it's kind of bringing them back and they don't understand it. That's so true.
And that's a great book, Body Keeps Score.
Body keeps the score, yes. Before you go, my last kind of question is, why leaders? Why are you so passionate about teaching leaders about shame? Because when you think about shame, it's a human experience, right? And that a lot of people struggle with, but you have targeted leaders. Why leaders?
Leaders oftentimes have the most impact, most influence with people. And in part, when you think about it, like we value transformational leaders. We value people that we can look up to. We value people that are going somewhere. But oftentimes, if we're not conscious and aware of what's going on inside of us, if you will, we can make decisions that really negatively impact people. And so leaders, I decided to go after because I felt like, man, I would get a lot more, have a lot more impact if I were to target leaders, because they are in charge of organizations, they're influencing people, they are leading. And this is my personal belief, is that we're all leading somebody somewhere. We are all leading somebody somewhere. And so when I think about leaders, I'm not just talking about a CEO of an organization who runs, has thousands of employees. I'm talking about a dad who has a wife and kids, who's leading his family, or a mother who's working and she's trying to raise her daughters, and they're making their sense of who they are by what they see their mother doing.
Yeah, no, that's good. And there's no way you can help our president out, because I'm sure he's dealing with a lot of shame.
I was wanting to go there. I was about to say there was a perfect example of someone who I think he doesn't even realize he's been triggered by shame. And he's on the front stage. So yeah, it's just that's a whole other conversation.
I know it's it's a whole. I'm not trying to go there, but when you start talking about being triggered, I was just like, yo, my president be triggered. Yo, I need you to go help my president out because he is triggered.
He needs a on-call therapist to be beside his bed to take his phone before he starts tweeting to make sure his tweets get screened. Yes.
Your wife says no.
No. Yes.
James, so thank you. That was really good. Like that was so good. You know, I love talking about this stuff so much. And I love how you're able to break it down. Even on your podcast, that's the way that he breaks things down. Tell people how they can reach you.
Perfect. So you can reach me at jamesperkins.help. And then I also run a podcast called The Shameless Leader. And I'll actually be releasing some content this upcoming week just related to the pandemic. One of those things is really how to be present in this moment. And there's some other opportunities. But the Shameless Leader podcast. And then if you have questions or want to figure out how you can work with me, whether that's coaching, counseling, you can just simply go to my page, jamesperkins.help, and click Talk with Me. And we can set up a time to chat. I love hearing people's stories. And I just love serving people, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, and I'm so grateful. If you notice, check out his podcast. If you notice the one at the top, the power of your story, and like that's really powerful. Just that name alone, the power of your story, and I think so many of us don't. When I say we don't know our story, I've sat with people on an intake where they tell their story, but they're so far removed from it. You know, because they've had to be removed from it because growing up, it was too hard to process. And so now I think we're kind of forced into a processing state. And so as the shame comes or whatever you're feeling, like lean into it and understand that there's so much power in like really understanding it's your story. Like you can't, like I tell people all the time, like you can't run away from your mind, you know? Like we try to do it all the time. Like, you know, we try to escape. You can't like cut off like part of it and be like, I want the good part. You're cutting off like all parts of you. So there's like so much power in like owning your story. So thank you, James. I appreciate you.
It's my honor. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, bye. Oh, that was so good. Okay, thank you guys for tuning in to another live episode of Celeste the Therapist podcast. I'm grateful and honored that you guys are here, been rocking out with me. Don't forget, Monday through Friday, you can catch my podcast live on Facebook, YouTube, and on Periscope. And then you can also Scope was buffering bad. Okay. You can also catch my podcast on all podcasting platforms. And you can also take this free wellness assessment course. It's a 10-minute video where I talk about these areas and the importance of understanding how you fall in line with these areas. And don't forget to check out James's. You can listen to James all day. I know he's good. Don't forget to check out James's podcast. It's a really good thing, I think, if you are, and you heard him, the leaders, like you may not think you're a leader, but you're a leader. You're leading your life. So the Shameless Leader podcast is something where he is basically going into more detail. Like we just sat for 30 minutes and I was just like in awe at everything he was saying. So imagine like breaking things down even further and having that in your ear, listening to it. It's an amazing thing for you to do. That's how you feed your spirit. Like that's how you are able to, thank you, Jessica. That's how you feed your spirit. That's how you're able to get to a space where you can have some balance, where you can have some peace. Please have him back on. Okay, I will. I promise. I promise I'll have him back on. Wes, when he was talking about and breaking stuff down, I'm like, yo, we can just have a podcast on this piece and that piece. And you're right. Like there's so much that we can keep going on with. It's amazing. I know he's going to be doing a retreat, an online retreat in May, at the end of May. So I'll make sure to keep you guys. I'll make sure to keep you guys aware of that. But yeah, so making sure you are tapping into what you're thinking, what you're feeling. It's important. Owning your story is important. Being able to do this stuff will allow you to have some sense of peace. So don't forget, we'll be back Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will be talking to somebody different. If you want to be on the show, or you know somebody that would be perfect to come on and share their knowledge, have them on. Let them know that I'm a good person, that I'll be nice to them. It'll be a nice, smooth, easy conversation that we'll have. I just want to get the word out to the people while, hey, Wes, I just want to get the word out to the people while being able to also like show what other people are doing. You know, that's why I started this, because I said, I want to show people that there's other people out here that's empowering other people. That's important because they're out here. So thank you guys. We'll be back Monday. You can follow me on all social media platforms. Go to celestetherapist.com. Until next time, love you guys. I'll talk to you later.
Every laugh, every smile, every hug, every kiss, every touch, every person in my life that I care about and love. But wait, maybe I'm getting too emotional. That's exactly what they say you ain't supposed to do. Suppress your feelings, never talk about your pain. Can't appreciate the sun without acknowledging it rains, right? That's right. So this a moment of clarity. And make sure you always protect your energy. You stay focused and your life gon' be lit. And you are now rocking with Celeste the Therapist. Let's go.